Sydney turned the corner and found herself standing before the doors of the practice room, staring at a boy stretching on the floor. Her rambling mind cut off abruptly, and all she could do was take in the sight of him. She moved silently, opening and closing the practice room door and posing herself against the wall, her eyes fixed on Winter's back. She was so quiet that he hadn't noticed her enter the room. His head stayed tilted down toward the floor as he stretched his legs, his brows furrowed in the mirror, his lips murmuring to the music blaring through the speakers. For a while, she just watched him. She remembered everything about him vividly, but what she remembered best were these little moments, like when he'd look full skyward and enjoy the rain or dance alone in a room, when he was so absorbed in something that he forgot entirely about the world around him. She wondered what he was thinking about. Music, most likely. A dance routine, perhaps. Selfishly, foolishly, she wondered if perhaps he was thinking about her. Long minutes passed before he finally finished his stretch, rubbed his neck with his towel, and pushed himself to his feet. His gaze went to the mirror instantly, and at last his eyes jumped to her. Their gazes met, and he froze. That's a quote from Icon and Inferno by Marie Lu. This is YA Book Chat, and I'm your host, Leah Stuhler. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of YA Book Chat. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. As always, I appreciate your support. I am pleased to bring you another author interview today, and I think y'all are really going to enjoy this one. I know I'm very excited about this because today I am interviewing Marie Lu, and I have been a fan of hers for a long time. And so if any of you are too, I know you'll be ready for this. Marie is the New York Times bestselling author of the Legend trilogy, the Young Elites trilogy, the Sky Hunter duology, and her standalone, The Kingdom of Back. She is also the author of Stars and Smoke, and her brand new follow-up to that, Icon and Inferno, which will actually be published tomorrow, June 11th. So please help me welcome Marie. It is so great to have you here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Thank you. I'm excited too. I absolutely love these books. So I'm very thrilled I get a chance to talk with you about them.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell everybody a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I am mostly a writer of science fiction and fantasy. I have been writing since I was a kid. I moved over to the States from China when I was 5. Didn't know any English, and my mom would send me off to kindergarten and tell me to write down 5 English words and memorize them and put them into sentences. And so that was what I did. And that was how I started writing. Technically, I would write these little paragraphs for myself. And eventually, once I learned English, I realized I just kind of really enjoyed doing that and just started stapling books together for myself from a really young age. I've been trying and failing to get published since I was 14. I still remember sending out my first query letters that were so awful for this really embarrassingly bad, Lord of the Rings knockoff fantasy. It took me about 5 manuscripts before I wrote Legend, and then that was the one that sold. And so I feel very lucky to be here and excited to talk a little bit about my latest. My latest duology, Stars and Smoke and Icon and Inferno, are actually not science fiction and fantasy, which is a change for me. They are contemporary thrillers. They're kind of like teen James Bond. So I'm excited to talk about those.
And they are very fun. And I have to say, I was actually surprised because I thought there was only going to be one book, because the way that the first one ended was okay, it had closure to it. Of course, there was this little window of possibility, but I was like, okay, that's it. It's probably just a standalone. So when I found out about Icon and Inferno, I was very excited. I was like, oh yes, I get more in this world.
I'm so glad that you're excited.
Yeah.
I really wanted to write them so that they were standalone, so that you could pick up Icon and Inferno or Stars and Smoke and read it without having to, know much about the other book. But the two very much, are entwined together. They're kind of episodic in the way that Friends is episodic, or Supernatural is episodic. You can kind of watch them out of order, but it's about the same. It's about Winter and Sydney, both of them, and they're both on separate missions in each book. So
it works well. I love that you said that when you were little and you would staple these little books together that you made, because my son actually does that too.
Really? I love
he does.
that.
It's so fun. He had this book series
My
that
God.
he and his friends wrote. This is
So
actually
sweet. I
really
love that.
funny. We are not Jewish at all, but
Right.
apparently they learned about Hanukkah at school because the book that he and his friends decided to write, it's called The Little Dreidel Boy. And it's about this little Jewish boy who plays with the
Oh,
dreidel at Hanukkah. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
that's so adorable. How old is your
So
son?
he's 10, but he's probably been doing this for a few
Oh,
years now, since he was like 7. So,
yeah.
and he's got like a
I love
stack
that.
of books and all his little
Oh,
papers, and he staples them together and keeps his little books in his room. So, yeah.
that feels so nostalgic to me. I'm having like major flashbacks to childhood. Yeah, my kid is 5, so he's kind of he loves to draw. So he's kind of he will draw like sequential art. He's kind of writes things that I can't quite read yet, but he's getting there. So that's really I love hearing that about your son. I think that's so sweet.
Yeah, it's fun. I hope that he keeps doing that and continues
Yeah,
on with it because he's got some good creative stories. So who knows?
that's awesome.
So you, like you said, you've been writing for a really long time, and
Mhm.
you have a good amount of books now that have been published. So does publishing a new book ever get old, or does it kind of feel like an awesome experience every with each book?
I think it's a little bit less terrifying each time because I still remember the first time Legend came out, and I had absolutely zero idea of what to expect or knew what to do. And so it was very, very scary. And I wouldn't say I'm like totally calm for every book release. I definitely am. I get really anxious. My anxiety is building up now just because, Icon and Inferno is about to come out. So I feel that familiar anxiety, but it's helpful that it's familiar. I'm like, okay, I know that this is like the usual hump that I got to get past,
Hmm.
releasing a story out in the world and hearing from readers. So I feel this kind of simultaneous anticipation, anxiety, like, will they like it? I hope so, sending a new kid out in the world. So I guess it's the main change is that I know to expect this feeling now. So it's not quite as terrifying.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah.
like I used to be an actor, and it was like
Oh,
I
cool.
would always get every audition and every performance, like I would always get nervous, but I knew that I was going to, like so I
Yeah.
would expect it and be like, okay, how can I channel this nervousness and each time for this audition or this performance or whatever it was.
Oh,
But
wow. I can't even imagine going into an audition. I can't even like look at a camera without like giggling. So,
it was a lot. It was a lot, but it's fine. Eventually you kind of
oh,
figure it out and get into a mode and adjust, but yeah.
right.
Well, tell me about your writing style. I always like asking authors this question because everybody is so different and writes differently. So I was wondering if you consider yourself to be more of like a plotter or a pantser, or if there are like any little routines or things that you do while you're writing to kind of help your process. Like I know some writers will listen to music while they're writing or have to be in a specific space and have their tea that they're drinking or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of in the middle between plotter and pantser, more pantser than plotter. I have tried my whole life to be a plotter, and it never quite works. I will outline out. I always write out an outline for myself. I always think I know what the ending is. I think I know what the chapters are, and then by chapter 4, I'm like off in the weeds. It happens every time, so I've kind of gotten used to it. My friend calls me headlights writer. So
Hmm.
basically, what you do is so what I do now is I outline out as far as the headlights shine on the road, so it's about 3 or 4
Ah.
chapters or so. And so I know the roadmap pretty well about 3 to 4 chapters on. And then I have no idea. It's just darkness. And so I'll write the 3 chapters, and then I'll outline another 3 chapters, and I'll write those 3 chapters and kind of just inch along that way. So I find that to be like a good middle ground for me right now, but it does not stop me from trying to plot. Like I've tried every single time and it always goes off. You had mentioned, writers who have to listen to music. I am definitely one of those people. I cannot listen to lyrics though when I'm
Hmm.
rafting. It's too distracting. So I listen to a lot of like movie soundtracks, video game soundtracks, and like instrumentals. But I have to have something on, like piano music, anything, ambience. I like writing in coffee shops, with the kind of ambience of people around. I used to be really rigid on when and where I could write. Like I could only write in my office in the morning between like 9 and 1 or whatever. But once you've been writing for a while, you do kind of have to learn to adapt to different writing situations because of deadlines and you're traveling and stuff. So I've gotten better at like writing on planes, writing on trains, writing at night, writing in hotels, that kind of thing. So sometimes I will write on my phone if something occurs to me, but I don't have my laptop with me. I will like write kind of like a poor man's version of of the chapter like on my phone and then go back and upload it to my computer and fix it.
That makes sense. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like you have to, as a mom, I know like stuff happens too. So you have to adjust your writing sometimes for that at home for your kids or whatnot.
Yeah.
It's funny because, I follow certain writers on Instagram, and it's funny because there's one in particular who had like, she's gone through kind of like a day in the life. This is my routine, like on Instagram, and she doesn't have any kids. So she's got this very like
different.
specific routine that she does. And I just keep thinking like one day
Right.
that's going to change. And what are you going to do?
I remember my routine before I had my kid and after, and it is night and day. Like I mean, I knew to prepare for it, but I obviously, you never really get ready for that change. And I think in some ways my day became more organized because you just have to like every minute, like you schedule down to the minute, and then in other ways it's less organized because, things happen. Like today we had a schedule change and you just kind of roll with it because, your kids' schedules changes. Sometimes they get sick and, you're like, there goes your work day. And then sometimes, and then they're growing older. So they're changing as they're getting older. Suddenly my son is in school and that like opened up a pocket of time for writing. And now my one rule that I never, ever break is I do not work on weekends now, like at all. I could write. I dawn till dusk, like into midnight, like look up. I'm like, what day is it? And not even know that it's the weekend. Now I'm very much like, it's the weekend, pens down. And so I'm really, I'm much more strict with my writing time and not letting it encroach on family time and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's good. It's important to have those kind of boundaries. Like that's my job right now is a teacher, and it's very hard to not do stuff at home. And especially not on the week. Like I try to not do anything on the weekends, but inevitably I always have to do something. And it's, so it's very hard to try and
I totally
separate it. So if you can, I think that's great. Like I'm trying to get better about it, but
I think sometimes you just got to give yourself a break because it's so hard. I know I have some friends who are teachers and you have so much stuff going on outside of teaching time. Like you've got papers to grade and all of this stuff. And so I don't know how you do it. That's just incredible to keep yourself together with all the things you have to do.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, but Well, let's talk about Icon and Inferno now. So like we said, this is a sequel to Stars and Smoke, which came out last year. But just in case and I know you said that we could, and you can, having read both of them, read them both individually. But just so that my listeners have an idea, in case for some reason they haven't read Stars and Smoke yet, why don't you tell everybody a little about what that book is about and then what Icon and Inferno is about?
Absolutely. So Stars and Smoke is the first book. If you read Icon and Inferno, you can definitely tell it's a sequel. So Stars and Smoke is the first one. It is about a boy named Winter Young who is 19 years old and the world's most famous superstar. So he's just think of like boy Taylor Swift, like that's him. Like everyone knows him. He is the hottest star in the world. And then he gets tapped one day to become a spy. And ends up being paired with this 19-year-old secret agent named Sydney Cossette, who just cannot stand him. She's like, why am I paired with a pop star? This is ridiculous. But he is the only one who can get in to a very exclusive event to take down a criminal tycoon in London. So the two of them are sent off to London on this mission together. And of course, sparks fly. They are at each other's throats all the time, but they are also like, I kind of like you. And they have to kind of deal with that whilst also surviving this mission to take down this criminal. So that's the first one. And, like we were saying, it can stand alone. So the mission finishes by the end of this book is very much like watching a Mission Impossible movie, kind of closes out. And then the next Mission Impossible movie, you kind of can watch out of order as well. So Icon and Inferno continues with Winter and Sydney being reunited for another mission. This time they are sent to Singapore to stop a presidential assassination of of the US president. Complicating matters is the fact that they have to also extract another secret agent who happens to be Sydney's ex. So this one has a lot of old flames coming back in. Sydney and Winter are forced to work together with her ex, which Winter is not thrilled about, but Winter also has to deal with his own ex-girlfriend who is along for the ride. They all have a very complicated history, and they all get in the way of Winter and Sydney's relationship whilst they are trying to solve this global crisis, which may unfold. No pressure, but all of it is work for two secret agents. And so that's a little bit about the second one. They were both really, really fun for me to write. So I hope people will enjoy them.
It's funny that you compared him to Taylor Swift, because when I read Stars, I mean, that's exactly what I thought. So when I read Stars and Smoke, and then I did an episode on Stars and Smoke last year with a friend of mine. And when we were talking about it, I said to her, thinking about Winter and like how, when he goes to his hotel room after his concerts or whatever, and he's in there and he's feeling kind of lonely or thinking about this, I was like, makes me feel like, wonder like, is Taylor Swift like that? Is that what she does too? Or
Right.
like, what's it like? But I automatically thought of Taylor Swift, of course, because huge superstar.
Nice.
So
I'm glad to hear that.
So like you said, this duology is a lot different from your other books because your other ones are more fantasy based. So what was your inspiration for this duology where you're writing about a secret agent and a pop star who are on this like mission together?
Yeah, it was a bit of a pivot for me, and it took me by surprise as well. So the story behind this series is that I began it in March of 2020, bit of a chaotic month for everybody. And I usually can escape into fantasy and science fiction. And I've been doing that since Legend. I've always loved escaping into fantasy and science fiction. And, back in 2010, when I wrote Legend, that was back when if you remember, we were all like, the end of the world is going to be so much fun. It's like 2012 was around the corner, the end of the Mayan calendar. Yay. There's all these disaster movies. So I was very like, dystopia is so fun. And now we're like, and then, fast forward to March of 2020, I'm like, dystopia, not fun, not actually fun, very chaotic, very bad. And that was when, we were really just at the height of COVID, and, we just didn't know what was going to happen. And we were washing our vegetables and like sanitizing our mail. And I remember feeling so overwhelmed by the terrible news coming out every day from around the world, and feeling like I can't actually escape into science fiction and fantasy right now because I feel like I am living in one. We are in real life contagion right now. It is bad. My brain cannot process a science fiction story right now. So I realized, I was like, you know what? I need to escape into like a sanitized contemporary that does not have COVID in it. And so I was desperately searching for escape during that time, as I'm sure everyone was. And so I was searching for any news article I could find that was not about coronavirus. And I stumbled across this random article from a while back that was about how former celebrities used to be spies. And it was fascinating. It was like Roald Dahl used to be a spy, who wrote James the Giant Peach. I know, right?
I didn't know
Cary
that.
Grant was a spy. I know. I read this and I was like, my mind is blown. Frank Sinatra was a double agent between the American mafia and the US government. Marlene Dietrich was a spy. Like there were so many Hollywood stars who were spies, especially during like the World War II era. They were like fighting against the Nazis with lots of celebrity spies. And I was like, what? That's a thing? And of course, now they're declassified. So I was immediately like, well, what modern day pop stars are spies that we won't know about for the next 50 years? Is Taylor Swift a spy? Like maybe. She takes a lot of flights and has a lot of weird lyrics that are we're all kind of, you just don't. Is Justin Bieber a spy? Like my mind just kind of went bananas with that article. And immediately I was like, I am going to write a story about a superstar who is tapped to become a spy. Because then you think about it, you're like, they actually make great spies. Like they are always they're around very important exclusive people all the time. They go to exclusive events. They're on private jets. No one knows, what they're doing on the private jet or where they're going. And no one questions. They're just like, oh, they're just off doing superstar stuff, Like, that's why they're in the middle of the jungle in Myanmar. Like, you just don't question superstars in the same way. And you don't think that they're a spy because you're like, Justin Bieber's not a spy. So yeah, so that was the origin of the story. And I had so much fun writing these books. They were my salvation during COVID, and kind of brought me the creative joy that I needed during that time. So I'm hoping that it gives people the same kind of like fun escapism.
That's so crazy. I feel like I had heard the Cary Grant one about him before. That sounded familiar, but the other ones, like
Yeah,
Roald Dahl. I
I
mean,
know that one really shocked me.
I mean, I love James and the Giant Peach.
I'm
To
like,
think
yeah, I'm
about
like, you were also a spy while you're
that's
writing
so
like
weird.
PSG.
Right?
So
Like,
good.
why? I
Yeah,
don't know, but that's crazy. Well, I
yeah,
love that. I think that's a really fun kind of origin story for these projects.
yeah.
Oh, man. So, okay, so we do have a lot of like, the secret agent, all the spy techs and the gadgets that like definitely made me think of 007. There's a lot of scenes where there's like extensive planning that's taking place to kind of figure out, how the mission's going to go. So, I was very curious at what kind of research you might have had to do for this book in order to incorporate like all of these elements into the story.
Yeah, the research was so different from my usual research and really fun to do. Different in that usually with fantasy and science fiction, I can kind of just like make stuff up and just put it in. If I'm kind of running out of ideas, I'm like, oh, I just make this thing up. And suddenly I'm like, oh, I kind of have to, I mean, it's a little outlandish, but like I kind of have to set it in the real world with real places and real stuff,
Mhm.
So for learning about the spy stuff, I read this really great memoir that actually helped me create Sydney as a character. It's called Coming of Age in the CIA. And it's a memoir. It's written by a lady named Amaryllis Fox, who that's her real name. And she was recruited into the CIA when she was 19 years old. So I was like, first of all, I didn't know there were teenagers in the CIA, but of course there are. And so she was recruited, and she started doing like the top level espionage stuff. So they hand her the black folder when she arrived. Like that was like, you are the overseas operative. You are doing the really
Wow.
dangerous, life-threatening missions, and you are not going to be able to tell anyone you know who you are and all of that stuff, like for the rest of your life, whatever, until this memoir, apparently. So it was just a fascinating look at what it takes to become a CIA agent, what sacrifices you have to make. And you kind of learn all kinds of just like dark little secrets about the CIA, where like they have this place in, I think, Virginia somewhere called the Farm, which is a simulated city. It's like a simulated town, and they send their recruits there to train for like 2 years with no contact with the outside world. No one in your life can know where you are. You basically just fall off the face of the planet, and you stay on this farm for 2 years. You live there as if it's a real town, and you conduct like fake missions there. And if at
Gosh.
any point during those 2 years you mess up once, you are out of the program. So it is very high stakes. It was really fascinating. I read that and I was like, okay, this is all going into the book. It was really interesting. They had a lot of interesting stuff about like low tech devices that they use. So this shows up in the book where they use Starbucks gift cards, like coffee gift cards, as a
Huh.
way for agents to communicate with each other when they're in town. They need to meet. So one agent will swipe their Starbucks card at the store and then buy a coffee, and then the other person on the other end will see the balance change on the card and know that it's time to meet. And that was like a real technique that the CIA used. And I was like, oh, that is fascinating. So yeah, it was really fun doing that kind of research. I read a lot of like random articles about the CIA and watched a lot of YouTube videos from like the former CIA director about what they used to do. And then I had to go to like real places to do research. There's a scene in Stars and Smoke that is set in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And I first wrote that scene without having gone to the museum. And then I actually went to the museum while I was on vacation and had to rewrite the whole chapter because apparently everything was in my head was in the wrong place. And pretty sure I freaked out like all the guards because I was just like looking at the security cameras and the windows, and they're like kind of following me around. Like, what are you doing? So yeah, it was a really, really fun and different type of research to do.
It sounds so fun. I love too, because some of the things that the elements are like the Starbucks card, but are really unique. Like I
Mhm.
love the use of the Necco wafers in the first
Oh,
book with Sydney.
good.
First of all, I was like, oh, Sydney likes Necco wafers. I love Necco wafers. I know like nobody else except for my mother who loves those things, right? So that was
Right.
just fun. And then I was like, and then when she uses them later, I was like, whoa, that's so cool. I never would have thought of that.
I love that you love that.
Mhm. And I think my favorite in this book, in Icon and Inferno, are Winter's cufflinks. I think
Yes,
those
I
are my
love it.
favorite little gadget
Yes.
in this one.
Hey, I'm glad you like that.
So, what was the most challenging part about writing a story like this that does involve a lot of like intricate detail and planning? Because you have, the missions that Sydney and Winter are assigned to complete, but of
Mhm.
course, there are always things that go wrong on a mission. And then again, we have somebody who appears like they're on the good side, but they're actually working for the bad guys. And
Mhm.
so then, there's got to, of course, be a balance of creating believability and mystery for your readers so that they don't figure things out too early and figure out
Mhm.
who the traitor is or what's happening. So tell me about your writing process for this and what makes it challenging when you're trying to formulate those kind of things.
Yeah, for this book in particular, I had to do more outlining than I am used to. And, we were talking earlier about being a planner or a plotter. And this, because of the nature of the story and because there were a lot of moving pieces with the mission, um, I did find that I would get myself stuck a lot more often if I didn't properly outline my chapters. So I would do my headlights writing, like the 3 chapters at a time, but I couldn't just kind of stare into total darkness after that. I kind of had to have a better idea of where I was going. So with Stars and Smoke, that was something to get used to for me. And I remember getting stuck quite deeply several times, in the plot and having to like unravel it and take out huge chunks because I had gone off into like the wrong corner without realizing it, and it just wasn't fitting into like the precise plot that was needed. So that became a little bit easier with Icon and Inferno, but it's definitely something that I'm not terribly used to doing. All of my books are relatively fast paced, but in fantasy, you can you slow down to describe the world. Like you
Mhm.
let the characters kind of seep into the world. Same with science fiction, and this time this is like a bullet train. It was just like off. So I felt much more pressure to stay to a plot, and make sure that am I mentioning everything correctly? Am I setting everything up so that A meets B when they're supposed to, and this thing happens so that that thing can happen, and so it was much more left brain than I thought it was going to be, and that was a new experience.
Yeah, there's a lot. I just feel like when I read a book like this, whether it's this type of book where they're, like spies and trying to complete a mission and there's all these details and kind of figuring out what's happening, or even, a thriller or like a murder mystery.
Mhm.
As I'm reading it, I'm always thinking like, man, I wish I could see like how the author did this because I know if it were me, I would have to have like a cork board somewhere with like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
post-it notes here and there and lines pointing here and going these directions to kind of figure out all the things because there's a lot. And then too, with, aside from the mission in Icon and Inferno, there's also this stuff going on with Winter where he's trying to figure out about who's writing this tell-all book about him. And
Yeah.
so there's like that side of things too. So
Hmm.
then, as the reader, you're like, okay, trying to figure that out. At least I was. I was
Yeah.
like going through my list of suspects in my head, like, who is the person writing this book? And then also, okay, what's going to happen over here? I know this mission isn't going to be as easy as they want it to be. So there's
Right,
always
right.
like, yeah, so I can
I'm
imagine.
I'm glad that worked out. I'm glad. Yeah, and I have so much respect for mystery writers because of exactly what you said. There's just so many pieces that have to fit. When I read, like, I remember reading Gone Girl, for the first time, and by the end, I was just like, I can't even begin to imagine like the brain work that needs to make this story. It's one
Hmm.
of those. Sometimes you read a book and you're like, oh, okay, maybe I could do that, but I read mysteries and I'm like, I can't do that. I absolutely can't.
Well, you're halfway there. I mean, I would say these books are getting you
Thank
close.
you.
So,
Thank you.
but and as a side note, also because you mentioned the author you said Amaryllis. What was her name?
Amaryllis Fox
Okay, right. Which you said was fantastic name, and it is.
is, yeah.
I also like when I read Stars and Smoke for the first time and their Winter and Sydney's names came up. I was like, wow, those are like fantastic names. Like, and they see like
Yeah.
Winter Young just like screams pop star, you know, and Sydney
Thank you.
Cossette is just like, I don't know, it's just this like perfect, fun little name. So your characters also have awesome names.
Thank you. I'm so glad you like them.
I will admit, I had to ask Tatiana to send me, I had the audiobook because I'm in the Macmillan
Okay,
Audio
nice.
Influences program. And so
Mhm.
I was listening to the audiobook for Icon and Inferno, and I was listening to Thames' name, and I was like, how would that be spelled? Is that fit? So I did have to email Tatiana and be like, can you actually send me the
Yeah,
digital art? Because I
yeah.
don't, but that's a really fun name too.
Thanks. I think that one's British. I think I saw it in like some kind of British baby name with
It
article.
feels very British.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Sydney and Winter. So I love these two characters and their relationship together. It is I will say though, as a reader, it is one of these like tropes that I kind of like love to hate because they're essentially like star-crossed lovers. So like they have all these feelings for each other, but you know in your head, like based on their lifestyles, that they can't be together. And so it's like this
Yeah.
heart-wrenching kind of thing. And then, there's a lot of obstacles for these two standing in the way of, being in love with each other, including in this book, their exes, Gabby and Thames.
Yes.
And so, it just seems like it's one of those situations where you would have to move heaven and earth for these two characters to really like
Mhm.
fully end up together. So tell me about what it was like developing their characters and their relationships and how kind of that all went for you.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you like them. I really, really, really love making character pairs like that. And usually when I'm starting off writing a new story, I don't tend to create characters in isolation. Usually I come up with not one character, but like clusters of characters at the same time. So Winter City came into existence at the same time. Like I always knew that they would be foils for each other, kind of the way that Day and June were foils for each other in Legend. I really love just coming up with like pairs that can really, their personalities can just clash against each other. One of my early exercises that I do before I start drafting is I write really detailed character profiles. So I had pages and pages of character notes for Winter and for Sydney, trying to make them into foils of each other. And once I have enough about each of them, I write what I call white room scenes. They are just dialogue. So I just
Hmm.
write these random little practice scenes where I just throw these characters together into a room and see what happens. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to start fighting? Are they going to start flirting? Or, maybe nothing. And that's kind of a way for me to test the characters out. So I did those, and immediately Winter and Sydney just kind of went at it. They just because of the like Winter is the kind of boy I have a soft spot for. Like he's very sensitive, he's emotionally sensitive. He's been hurt before in the past, but he wears his heart on his sleeve. He's very just kind of emotionally attuned, which I think is kind of necessary to be a pop star, to be a superstar, a creative. And because of the wounds that he's gotten in the past, like that's why he's famous. Like he cannot get enough love. So he's just on this mission to get love, and that's basically what fame is for him. And whereas Sydney is the complete opposite. She's like, I don't need love, I don't need friends, I don't need anyone. Walls up, barbed wire. Love is an illusion. Like she's very just like heart behind like many, many, many layers of walls. And so when they meet, Winter, it was so much fun for me to just write like Winter just does not get it. He's just like, why are you so prickly? Like, why are you like this? And Sydney's just like, you are just a walking, vulnerable little squishy thing. Like waiting to get stabbed all the time. Like they just can't with each other. And at the same time, they're really fascinated by how the other person is capable of walking through the world that way. And they're both very, very competent at what they do. And I've always found competence very attractive. Winter is very good at what he does, and Sydney is very good at what she does. And the two of them kind of obviously have never come across somebody quite like the other. Sydney's never worked with a pop star. He's never met a secret agent, and he's kind of fascinated by what she's really good at. And she feels the same about him. And I think that is the spark that starts to pull them together, where they're just both like respect for, each other's abilities and talents. And that was really, really fun for me to play with. I loved bouncing them off of each other because of that. And I think that always makes for fun romance.
Definitely. And in Stars and Smoke, we've got this like enemies to lovers trope that happens. And I don't know about other people, but like for me, that's my favorite. That's my favorite.
I love that trope.
I'm
Yeah,
always like, ooh, this is going to be really good because they don't like each other and they're not getting along. And then you're waiting for that one moment where they finally just like crash and come together. And it's so satisfying. Right.
It's so satisfying. I'm always like, does that happen in real life? I'm not actually sure if this works out quite the same way as it does in fiction, but it's great fiction.
It is. I love Sydney and Winter's relationship. And yeah, I don't, it is funny to read these things and go, that doesn't happen for real. But, I never had like an enemies to lovers relationship for real in my life. It was always like friends to lovers or whatever. So,
mine was just like my enemies stayed enemies. So,
right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's all right. So as you were talking about Winter too, and saying how like he's really good at being a pop star and what he does, it kind of makes me think of in New Kids on the Block. Okay.
Yeah.
Donnie Wahlberg, he's the Winter Young in that group. Like because he knows what he is doing, and he knows how to like get all of the fans involved and like just what to say and do. And he just posted this video on Instagram yesterday, and I was watching it. It was funny because he has like the Mr. Rogers entrance music playing in the background. And he walks into his door and he's doing the Mr. Rogers thing with his sweater, taking his jacket off, hanging it up. Then he does the shoes. And then he stands up and you think like he's gonna like, I don't know, walk towards the camera or wave goodbye or whatever. No. What does he do? He pulls his shirt up to show everybody his chiseled abs. And I'm like, that's because you're Donnie Wahlberg. So he's like the Winter Young, like knows what he's doing.
Right. Yeah, I could see Winter doing something like that. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But speaking of love, though, like there actually is a strong theme in both of these books of like love and loss, because Sydney and Winter have both lost family members who were very close to them, and it affects them very much and the decisions that they make on each mission and kind of the decisions that they've made about their lives in general. Like how you were saying, Sydney is like, nope. I want to be by myself. I want to do this. I don't need anybody. So talk to me about you deciding to include, this theme as part of the character development for both of them. And is there anything that you wanted your readers to take away from that?
Yeah, for sure. Building up characters is always my absolute favorite thing to do in writing. Like by far, it's more fun for me than world building, than drafting, than anything. I just absolutely love building them up that way. And when I started writing this story, I knew immediately that both of these characters' personalities and foils were going to be defined by their past and the people who were in them, because I think that's how most of us get defined. In Legend, even though it was set in a very dark world, Day and June come out of it as pretty good people because they were raised right. Like they were raised by good, loving people who were invested in them. And in contrast, in the Young Elites, which is my fantasy series, the main character, Adelina, is essentially like a teen Darth Vader going down the path of being a villain. And she did not get what she needed when she was young, and it turns her in a different way. And I've always been interested in kind of exploring that. So with Winter, I always knew that his driving desire for fame came from some past trauma, past pain with his brother, his mother, his father, nobody who was really there for him when he needed to be. And that comes from me thinking, like, I've thought about pop stars a lot in my life. And I just always feel like for someone to pursue that, there is some kind of trauma in your life, like something drives a person to do this extraordinary, very difficult thing. And it doesn't have to be necessarily like a catastrophic trauma, but it can be some seed, like some pain that has implanted itself in their bodies, and they cannot live their lives. They just can't bear living an ordinary life. Like there's something there's a pain driving them. And so that was very much Winter. And Sydney is the opposite, where, she also has like a very dark past, and grew up kind of in this like dead end childhood, and being a secret agent is her escape from that past. So Winter and Sydney are both kind of running from something, and they're running from it in very different ways. Winter's way of dealing with his life is to overexpose himself. Like he is like, I will be everywhere, everyone will love me. And with Sydney, hers is like, I will shrink away. I will be invisible. No one will know me, because that way no one can hurt me. And I really enjoyed putting them together, because I think really, what makes a romance spark sometimes is like they both have this like kind of way of dealing with life. And then you meet this other person who changes the way that you approach that life. And so Winter has these epiphanies too about himself and his own self-worth, and what he deserves to have, and whether he can rely on himself and be alone sometimes. Whereas Sydney she kind of learns to open up her heart a little bit. She learns to be vulnerable, and learns that there's value in being vulnerable to someone else. Like I actually didn't really know that about Winter's character until I wrote the end of Icon and Inferno. So I think it's like the second to last chapter, maybe, where, Winter sits down with a very close friend of his, and his friend is just calls him out on the things that, he needs to do. Where he's like, you will never be happy in life unless you tackle this. And I didn't know that about him until that moment. I was like, oh, that's why he's on this like journey. A lot of it feels very kind of not even like a conscious thing that I'm thinking about doing. But, as the story goes on, it's something that develops over time.
And we see a little bit of it too with Sauda and Neil and their relationship as well, which is interesting. And then, and also because Sydney has had that example of Sauda and Neil, that is a lot of, I would imagine, what shapes her as well, because she saw that and what they went through. So her thinking, how could I ever be with Winter when Sauda and Neil have gone through this?
So with them, Sydney looks at them very much as like, this is what your life could be. Like they are kind of representative of what Winter and Sydney might be in an alternate universe, and what could go wrong. And it takes Sydney taking a moment, I think, to herself to think like, is that what I want my life to be? Like, can I live with that? Can I bear that? So yeah, I really loved writing Sauda and Neil too. They were probably my favorite side characters to write.
I loved them. They were in both books. Like I just want to like Neil is like, I just want to like give him a hug or something, if he were in real life, I'd be like, you're just amazing. And Sauda is great. And I love their relationship and like the banter that they have together. And they're very great side characters too.
I'm glad you like them.
Well, what would you say you enjoyed the most about writing Icon and Inferno?
Oh gosh, I loved writing the romance between them. I think I just, like I said, one of my favorite things is to build up like the characters early on, and with them, every time they were in the room together, I was like, this is going to be a great writing day. I get to write like their banter, and it just came very easily between them. So I think that was probably my favorite thing to do, was whenever Winter and Sydney were in a room together, in Icon and Inferno, when they first meet again after like a year of being apart, I've been dying for like a year to write that scene. When I finally got to sit down and write, I'm like, yes, what are they going to say to each other? Are they going to be snarky? It was just really fun to put them together again.
I'd been dying for a year to read that scene. From as soon as I found out, that Icon and Inferno was coming, I was like, oh, like that was the one thing I was really looking forward to, was that first scene when they are back together and how that would go, so. All right. Well, I know that you might not be able to give any details about anything, but I also know, even though this book is coming out tomorrow, I know writers always have stuff going on. So do you have another project that you're working on?
I do. I have a lot of stuff going on that I really wish I could share with people. This is like the curse of being a writer. I feel like every writer I know, we have like news, just like backlog news that we're not going to be able to share for a bit. But there's a lot of really exciting things I'm working on. I can talk a little bit about I have a book coming out next year, which is actually adult. And that I am very eager to share a little bit more about. Hopefully by the end of summer, I think I can talk about that one a little bit more. So I am really excited about that. That's next summer. And then I have another couple of books that I'm currently working on, very early stages right now. I'm like not barely even first drafting yet. So I'm in that kind of magical early stage with these two books, but I'm really excited about when people can read those as well. So those are going on. And there's a couple other things that are going on behind the scenes that I hope to be able to talk about at some point.
Right. We'll keep our eyes out for all of that, especially the adult book. I love when, young adult authors whose books I read have venture then into like the adult world too. Cause I read more young adult than I do adult books, not gonna lie, but, I do love seeing like what they do in an adult book version. It's always fun. I just read Veronica Ross' new one, which is an adult book. Oh my gosh,
I can't wait to read that one. When Among Crows.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've got that on my shelf and I'm dying to read it.
It was very good.
Oh, good.
Super quick read.
But I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it very much. So I had the audiobook for that.
I'm so excited. Now I can't wait to read it.
The Macmillan Audio Influencers Program is amazing.
Nice. I love that.
I get 4 free audiobooks a month.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. So all I have to do is listen and then promote them. Super easy.
So awesome.
But, and this is how I got both of your books. So Icon and Inferno and Stars and Smoke. So
well, thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for being here today with me, Marie. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you and getting to know you and these characters and hearing all about these books.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. Yeah, and I loved all of your questions. And yeah, thank you for reading it and for our wonderful chat. And I'm really excited to hopefully get to talk to you again sometime.
All right. Me too. That would be great. And for everybody listening, I will put links in the show notes for today's episode to Marie's website and her social media, and also, of course, where you can purchase these books. So thank you, everybody, for listening today, and we will chat again soon. Today's episode featured the book Icon and Inferno by Marie Lu. A special thank you to Marie for joining me on the podcast today. And I'd also like to say thank you to Tatiana Merced Zaru at Macmillan Children's Publishing Group for setting up the interview. Be sure to check out YA Book Chat on Instagram and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get your episodes as soon as they are available. YA Book Chat was created by, is hosted, and edited by me, Leah Stuhler.